The Sherpa's Podcast Picks is presented in cooperation with Thresher PR, which is headed by Stephen Joyner. We now take you to the Sherpa Chalet, where Jim the Podcast Sherpa will be interviewing podcasters near and far. Personally, if you've ever stood next to the Sherpa, you'd hope it will be far. That new yak-scented shampoo isn't getting him any new friends.
Are you ready for some sci-fi? In this episode of the Sherpa's Podcast Picks, we're chatting with Devin Blair, creator of the Chemical Rocketeers podcast. Personally, I think the only thing scarier than science fiction is that stuff the Sherpa puts in his hair. I swear, it must glow in the dark.
Welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It's the podcast about, podcasts. And now, coming to you from Mount Podcastia, here's your host who wonders what's on your podcast playlist, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, rebels of the Sherpolution, and welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It is the podcast about podcasts and so much more. Jim the Podcast Sherpa, coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios, here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, where I get to overlook all of the millions and millions of podcasts that are out there. You know, my guest today, he's led a pretty interesting life. He started out actually as a chemical engineer, and he wanted to become a writer, and he's been traveling the world, and he's created a podcast, and he's traveling the world to actually help enhance that podcast. The show is called Chemical Rocketeers Podcast, and it is a sci-fi podcast. Really interesting stuff. You're not going to believe where he was when I actually got the chance to sit down and have an interview with him. This you will find out in the interview. His name is Devin Blair, and I got to get to know Devin a little bit. And he's originally from Tennessee, but he was quite far away when we got to talk. So we are going to talk to Devin, and we are going to learn about Chemical Rocketeers podcast. And right after that, we're going to follow it up with some Sherpa Samples. We are here in the adventure room in the Sherpa Chalet. My guest is coming to us via Zoom, and this is crazy. He's coming to us from Odessa, Ukraine. And now he doesn't live in Russia or anything like that. Actually, I believe he's an American citizen, but he's traveling abroad, and we're doing this long-distance interview. Now, his name is Devin Blair. He is the creator and host of the Chemical Rocketeers podcast. So, Devin, how exactly did you end up in Odessa, Ukraine, and what time is it over there as we're talking? I know it's 10 o'clock here. So that means it's about 5 o'clock in the morning there?
You are spot on about that one, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah, so the way how just to give you kind of the entire position I'm basically, of course, a story writer that goes out to these different countries, and I find two ways of mixing certain elements of what I see and what I experience during these places and just makes them into the podcast. So the way how I got to Odessa, Ukraine was actually doing a tour around Ukraine itself. And then, I basically landed up on here because I was actually pushing towards the Eastern country anyways, because I actually came from Poland, Germany, Morocco, and other various countries, which I have another country I'm going to shortly, which is Moldova. Yeah, Moldova. And passing through and all that kind of stuff. So I've just been pushing and traveling, exploring.
How long has this has been one continuous trip where you go back and forth, or you take a breather? How does that work for you?
For right now, just a continuous trip.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where are you originally from?
Oh, I'm originally from Tennessee.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say, that's not a Russian accent.
Oh, no, of course not. No.
So, I mean, we don't get political on our podcast, but you're safe where you are right now, right? We don't have to worry about any explosions in the background or anything like that.
Oh, no, that's actually a good question. No, not at all. I mean, there's actually more in the safer enchilada of the entire country. I mean, I actually did a full tour around Ukraine itself. I mean, there's more of the conflict is actually in Dustuk and more down the southeast area.
Okay. That's probably like the border, by the southeast border then.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, good. Well, I'm glad that you're safe.
Yeah, trust me. I mean, as much as I want to try to get more media, I don't think I want to try to get explosions, especially hearing all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's really been worth it. Trust me.
All right, so I'm going to gather that you've been a big sci-fi fan since you were younger.
Yes, I've always been like into mechatronics and robots and sci-fi when I was older. I think because a lot of it rubbed off because my dad was always into like X-Men and like other sci-fi stuff, and so I just started picking up and then started becoming more the science freak.
Mm-hmm. What usually did it for you growing up?
Oh, say again. My bad.
What usually did it for you growing up? What was the thing that you loved the most?
This might be kind of a geeky way of saying this, but basically just how I don't know. That's such a good question because it's just started to click. I mean, I guess because I just got into robots and then like when I started watching all this other kind of stuff and then
okay,
like, I don't know. That's a really good question too. I just started to click in. I mean, I guess when you're younger and all that kind of stuff, and you have like this kind of record, it's kind of like learning like different languages at a very fast rate when you're younger, and like you don't really get to pick it up as like older and all that kind of stuff as much. And I guess ever since I got like introduced to it, I've just been like all over that kind of stuff, you know, like Terminator and then RoboCop and then everything. Oh yeah, it was movies like that. My dad and my family members got me into is like Terminator, RoboCop, and the older films.
Okay,
so, you know.
I got it. I guess that would be a natural progression, especially. I was, as I told you, I was checking out your podcast, the Chemical Rocketeer, and it definitely has that sort of futuristic vibe to it. You know, they're kind of like a very distant civilization, right? Is that what the intent that you were going with? And you know, everything is very robotic and very kind of like a sterile environment.
So long story short, for the Chemical Rocketeers, there's like more podcasts each episode. It was like a lot of trial and error I had to go through for like the first season because like the first season's wrapped up. It's just been pre-recorded. It is a more distant colony. It's basically takes the entire colony that's called the Rocketeers colony that actually have to rebuild humanization after a catastrophic event happens on planet Earth. So, we're not there, but it's just that's basically the whole entire intent of it, and they have to expand to visit other planets to expand their entire ways of meaning to survive. So
this really does kind of coincide with what you're doing, though, isn't it? I mean, you're writing about different planets, but I mean, you're definitely visiting different cultures while you're making your way around Europe and and wherever else you may end up.
I mean, that's only the best way that's how the whole podcast works, if that makes sense, because it's basically I see these cultures. I mean, it is like different worlds. I mean, especially in the Eastern country. I mean, especially compared to America. I mean, you never they always interact differently, and you just don't know. Even for example, them like I don't know. I go so far to say like they won't like hold the door open for you like how American does. They're just kind of like open the door. It's not like they're being rude about it. It's just like they're just right. Or like how they do their food or like everything else, you know what I mean? It's just like it is like a completely different world. It's not like your typical like, oh well, United States American over here.
Right. Their way of life is just very removed from what we are, and it's not that a question of being right or wrong. It's just that's just how their society goes, and that's how our society goes, and we got to learn to respect both sides, right?
Exactly.
So, what other kind of writing do you do apart from for the podcast? Is there anything else that you do?
No, after that's a good question too. After a lot of trial and error throughout the entertainment industry, just in general, and after so long story short, to give you the general scope of it, I used to work back in my. I actually graduated from chemical engineer technology, my chemical engineer tech school and all that kind of stuff. Okay. And so I used to work in my field and all that kind of stuff, but unfortunately, some things that kind of occurred and just didn't really have a good time working back in my field. But after a lot of trial and error in the entertainment industry, and I found myself working around that, finally found the podcast, and I want something I can actually stick with and all.
Okay. It is an interesting combination when you think about it, because there is entertainment and there is science to it.
Yeah, that was kind of the whole niche about working around the industry, because, I mean, I didn't just walk into the podcast. I actually did, like, other venues, like, for staging or, like, pirate work or from modeling acting. I didn't just walk into the podcast, like, all willy-nilly. I actually had to start from venues like that and then work my way up. So, work my way around.
So are the characters in the podcast from chapter to chapter? I know you actually call them different missions as as you introduce them and even in the outro. Are they like they're going to be different characters in each episode, or they're kind of go from mission to mission together, or as they're going through the different divisions? How is that going to work?
Okay, so that comes with a lot of trial and error. The characters are completely different. It's just sometimes like with my voice, and I still have to like try to rephrase like the different character voices, which I'm still I have pretty much keyed down for like season 2 and all that kind of stuff, where I should at least. It might take a little bit more, but yeah, the characters are completely different, and they go out on these missions to actually retrieve like something for the colony, which is for the Rocketeers colony, to help them in the better effort of the frontier. I mean, especially if you got like Rico or Slade or Sam and all that kind of stuff. There is more characters, but they are completely different. But they actually interact with each other in like real world like scenarios and all that kind of stuff. So you got like your operation, you got projects and reports and all.
So there's connections between them, but they're kind of like fake connections, in other words.
Yeah, they're like real connections. They actually connect with one another and all that kind of stuff. I know it seems a little weird because, I mean, when I got into the podcast and all that kind of stuff, we didn't really know what the podcast was going to be like when I was actually working with my producer. But after a little bit more of, just like I said before, a lot of trial and error in the research. Like, basically, it is like research and development. A lot of trial and error, and then finally get more like figuring. Like, it started like one of those type of scripts, like those fun little scripts in episode 1, and then it started to turn into more of like a storyline, like connecting. Like, once you hear more and episodes get out, then you'll get the gist of it.
It's interesting because I noticed like the length of the episodes is relatively short, probably about 15 to 20 minutes or so. And there's a lot of activity going on in that brief period of time, even even while you're narrating the story and everything else is, going on in the background, kind of jiving with your dialogue.
Mm. Oh, yeah, that's actually another good question too. It takes a lot of this comes from my chemical engineer side of everything. It's called like balancing out the formula. It's kind of like saying balancing out the force, but it's actually balancing out the formula and trying to keep everything balanced between the Rocketeers, like the Rocketverse Chronicle, or actually the Rocketeers universe and today's universe. Because I'm trying to keep it more grounded and like realistic and all that kind of stuff without having too much of like being too much crazy. And it's like, So that's basically the whole gist of the thing I'm trying to shoot for.
Okay.
So
I could see that. And as it grows a little bit more when you're going into season 2, what's going to be a little more different? I know you said it's going to be like a little bit more of like a storyline, right, between the episodes, and I guess we get used to the characters a little bit more too.
Yeah. So with the characters and everything else, I don't want to spoil too much because it is a bit classified.
No problem.
No. Okay.
We're spoiler free. That's okay.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, long story short, an event happens on the Rocketeers colony, and they have to find ways to rebuild, basically. And so we get more of a deep dive of the characters of they're basically it's going to be basically you're going to get to know more about the characters. I mean, especially after on my travels of crafting my work and all that kind of stuff, I figure what the character is supposed to be like and how they act and how they interact with one another, or how they interact with like environment. I mean, let's just say it's going to be a lot more better craft than the ones before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like you said, they're originally, I guess, from Earth. So they, they're speaking in Earth language. There's not really too much that we know about other creatures on like in the areas where they are and stuff like that. And so people can actually just kind of jump in listening to your podcast and get what's going on, and not have to like do a deep dive from the very beginning to understand every element. I mean, probably from the beginning is always the best.
Yeah.
But at least there's not a lot to throw them. There's no special languages or anything like that. Everything is, it's unusual, but it's, I guess from a point of view from an Earthling.
Yeah, no, and that's the whole gist of the like when they actually visit these different planets. I'm actually the writer for I do take inspiration from other people and take comments from other ones because I mean this is a kind of it is seasonal based, but it's kind of like I won't say necessarily live serve because it's not a video game yet. And it would be pretty cool if it was. Don't get me wrong. That might become later, but so with when they actually meet these different factions and different creatures and all that kind of stuff, I have a lot more lore to build into them, which they can be found on Discord and all that kind of stuff, which actually tells you about like how the faction what their beliefs is and what their background is and doing so. So, like, if they meet, like, glowing worms, for example, they're called the Blights, and they're basically, like, worm creatures, or, just guys. Yeah, they have lore with them, too. Yeah.
So people, are you saying that people could do, like, more of a deep dive into the story if they would, like, get more into social media for, like background stories and stuff like that? Is that how you're going to do it?
Yeah, basically on my link tree, I have each platform, which I don't try to, like, spread them too deeply, but I try to, like, have, like, I would kind of say like a tripwire. So it's like, okay, they listen to the podcast and then they go to like one of the links. So for example, like Discord, which I post a lot of that stuff for like background of like the characters, like how the personality is, how the factions are, and basically some other elements. You'll just have to go on it and you'll start reading it for each like operation comes out. And there's like these reports that's actually branches off the lore of like the characters and basically like side missions in a way for the operation projects they do.
Okay. And that's going to be like the gist of it, where they're repairing, they're rebuilding, they're linking up with other people. So it's civilization building or civilization rebuilding, better yet.
Yeah, because that's their entire objective. That's basically they plant something. I mean, I hope this whole thing happens on planet, and then they're transferred to Horizon Moon, which is basically the moon. I just added Horizon because I thought it'd be a nice touch to it. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot more lore to like why Horizon Moon is called Horizon Moon, but yeah, they're basically the same way as like how anyone else would, like, I don't know, for example, lose their home or lose something else, and they have to go back, go somewhere else and rebuild.
Okay.
Yeah. Hopefully that makes sense. I mean, I don't want to confuse anyone.
They have to listen to the podcast to really understand it and kind of get the feel for it, I think, to begin with. It's definitely very unique from a lot of podcasts, as far as storytelling is concerned. And I listen to like a lot of different storytelling podcasts. So, you can't, like I listen to an episode, but I know you can't just listen to one episode and say, well, I get what this podcast is about, because I get the feeling like an onion. There's kind of like a lot of layers to this. And, you can probably take it in a lot of different directions, if you choose to.
Yeah, and that's the whole beauty of it too, and that's the reason I've been reaching out to like other podcasters and like doing cross collabs and all that kind of stuff, and doing like because I'm in more like the promote phase and all that kind of stuff and everything else, which I do have working with the team and all that kind of stuff with doing that kind of stuff, and then working with my producer and then everything else, but yeah, because that's just the whole beauty of it. It's like anything that you can think of actually mixing into the storyline, or just to make a little fun thing out of it, then. Yeah, I mean, it's actually very flexible for itself, too. I mean, as long as I have the event and the location. Because I got the factions and characters and everything else. It's just, writers are going to be writers.
So how many people does it take for you to put together, like, an episode of your podcast?
So usually I'm just the writer and all that kind of stuff. I'm the writer and the voice actor. So I basically, everything like you hear and all that kind of stuff, that's actually me writing it. And my producer is the guy who produces and edits the sound effects and everything else for it. So it's basically kind of like a two. Well, we used to have this other person that used to work with, the producer I used to work with, but things, happened and all that kind of stuff. And then, just kind of me and him.
Okay.
Right now.
So because it's interesting that when you set up that kind of soundscape too, like I was really impressed with how like everything that the narration and the sound effects were really just very well synced. I think that's like it makes it very immersive for folks who are listening to the show, especially like when you got the headphones on and you hear like the little sounds and, and some of them are getting bigger and some of them are going away. And it kind of reminds me of like old records from the 60s where you'd hear music coming in from the left speaker, the left headphone and kind of going out the right headphone. You kind of like to set up that sort of powerful soundscape with everything.
Yeah, and that's all work to my producer, Tom Goley. His studio is called To the Moon Creative. It's based out in Nashville, and he deals with all that kind of sound effects. He just knows his stuff. He's basically that type of guy where he just he knows like every single, like I wouldn't say know every single thing, but I mean it takes a lot of craftsmanship in order to get into that. I mean, I definitely do appreciate you saying that too, because I mean it does take expertise in order to get it done and all that kind of stuff, but.
You're working with a good you've got a good choice in a collaborator there.
Well, thankfully, especially in a very cutthroat industry and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he definitely does really good work with and all that kind of business.
Yeah. So, when you're not working on your podcast, are you listening to other podcasts? What are some of the ones that you like to check out?
It's actually a good question right there. I mean, I can't really think of names off the top of my head right now. It's basically just kind of like I was saying earlier, like more psychological. I mean, it's more like psychological, like podcasts as I try to listen to and all that kind of stuff instead of like so much of sci-fi, because I just like how the human brain works in general, because then you can like learn more. And like, once you start understanding why some parts happen and all that kind of stuff, it's like, now you can start getting more of a good idea about it. You know what I mean?
Okay, so more like the physiological stuff having to do with the brain and psychology and stuff like that. That's the type of stuff that you're drawn to?
Well, I don't want to be an alien person, but yes.
Okay, no, that's hey, those podcasts are out there, Devin. So there can't be anything wrong with that. The people who make these know there's going to be an audience of more than one, so you've got nothing to worry about.
Oh, no, for sure. I mean, I'm not really too much about the podcast, but usually I was making more of like a reference joke to like aliens because of how they eat brains and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that. Right over me.
No, that's on me. I phrase it kind of weird, but it's basically about like human brains and psychology. Like I said, I'm not like an alien from Mars. I'm not here to like eat anybody.
Okay. That's good, because that little feeling in my stomach, that is not a baby alien. That's probably just gas, so we don't have to worry about that. So we have this portion of the show, and it is called Shameless Self-Promotion.
Okay.
And this is where you can let everybody know how they can find out about the Chemical Rocketeer podcast.
Sure. It's actually posted everywhere you can think of. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Instagram, Discord, Podbean. Yeah, anywhere you can think of. I'm actually searching into the search bar. You can search it on there.
Did you just type in the name of the show? Is that probably the best thing to do?
Yep, just Chemical Rocketeers or Chemical Rocketeers Podcast.
Okay, that's nice and easy.
Hey, I try to be.
Okay, so like I said, I know we don't want you to give away too many spoilers, so I won't ask you too much for the future of this podcast, because we're gonna have to just have people listen and find out all the exciting stuff that's gonna be coming your way. So thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Jim.
Now it's time for Sherpa Samples. Got a podcast for the Sherpa to sample? Let us know and we'll mention your name on the show.
It is time once again for Sherpa Samples, and that is when I take a look at what's out there on the podcast charts and let you guys know, because maybe there's something on there that you might want to add to your podcast playlist. I've gone through so many shows and so many charts. On the podcast app that I have, there are several charts, and I know I've gone through the top 200 podcasts, and I'm almost through the top 100 trending podcasts as well. So I've definitely been feeding you guys a lot of information and got more. Yes, there is more for you, such as The Blueprint with Jen Psaki. Jen Psaki, I believe, was the press secretary for former President Joe Biden, and I think she worked for the Obama administration as well. So she's chatting it up with a lot of newsmakers and politicians and all sorts of folks in between. Loremen is hosted by two British guys, and they discuss a lot of the legends locally known and widely known. And the episode that I caught was about the curse of the black monk. I didn't think that monks could curse, much less leave a curse. But yeah, you can check that out. Really interesting stuff. It's very British, of course. Very British. Football cliches. Now, of course, this is very British too because it's soccer, not football. Sorry, I always have to do that. But I know people are expecting football podcasts and they're like, this isn't football. This is soccer. So there's a bunch of folks on there, and they really just talk about the language that is used when commentating and interviewing a lot of the football, parentheses, soccer players, and the games that are going on as well. The Copernic Affair is a true story about a mild-mannered Canadian professor whose name was Hassan Diab, who was actually accused of blowing up a mosque in France. So it goes into, did he do it? Or was he set up? Or what was the real story behind this? But this podcast goes into an investigation. I think it's actually a Canadian news company that presented this podcast, if I'm not mistaken. Another true crime, this one's really interesting. It's called Crook County. The crook in this county, I guess, is named Kenny the Kid Tequila, and he was a mob hitman who was actually a fireman who was leading a double life, and the podcast is narrated by his son, who is interviewing Kenny in prison. Really wild stuff. And Kenny is brutally honest in the interview from the episode that I heard. So if you like that kind of stuff, definitely check it out. Scratch and Win is about gambling, about when the mob in Boston was running a numbers racket and they were doing it in the back of a store. And there are two FBI guys who went undercover to record all of these conversations. Really wild stuff. Blink is Jake Handel's story. This is another interesting one, more like a medical mystery, I guess. He was a young man who had problems with drugs, but then they found out that he had this rare brain disease that would actually ultimately leave him paralyzed and then kill him. And he went into a coma, and then all of a sudden he woke up from the coma. So he is telling the story about everything that happened. Really powerful stuff. This was unique, too. It's a podcast called Why Do We Do That? It is hosted by paleoanthropologist Ella Al-Shama. And it's a lot of the things that we do in society that we probably never even think about why we do them. For instance, the episode that I listened to was Why Do We Have Grandmothers? I know there are other ones like Why Do We Gossip? Why Do We Kiss? You don't really think about why we do them. We just do them. Hopefully you're not gossiping about who's kissing who, because that might end up on, what a segue that was, that might end up on Long-Winded with Gabby Windey. Gabby Windey, I think, was on The Bachelorette. I think that was how she gained her fame. She's got a quirky sense of humor. I really couldn't kind of get this podcast. She was spouting a lot of strange scientific stuff and medical stuff. But then at the end, she said, I don't believe anything that I say. So I didn't really know if we were being put on and she was being funny. I guess she's probably on YouTube. Gabby was also a cheerleader for the Denver Broncos as well. So, and she's got a podcast. Cheerleader with a podcast. Hey, go, go, go. Pod. I don't know. And lastly, there's a podcast called We're Your Girls. And I didn't catch the names of these hosts. And I apologize for that. I was looking in the credits and I didn't see it. And these are two ladies who met, I think, in a beauty pageant. And they're both very funny. They're very charming. I think that the conversations are probably going to get a little bit more graphic. So maybe not one that you want to listen to with the kids around. But definitely a lot of good female humor, a little bit of raunchy. So if that is what you enjoy, that's fine. And speaking of raunchy, or not speaking of raunchy, we're going to head into the very clean outro.
Want to join the rebels of the Sherpolution? Follow us at Sherpolution on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky.
Thanks so much to Devin Blair for coming on the show and spending a little time. Safe travels to you, my friend. Get home safe whenever it is that you get home, or to wherever it is that you may call home, sir. And be sure to catch his podcast, Chemical Rocketeers Podcast, wherever you catch your podcasts. I'm going to provide his Linktree link in the show notes. I'm getting a little silly. It's late at night as I'm doing this, of course. And if you want to hear more silly, maybe you want to hear some more of this podcast, and all you have to do is like and subscribe on your favorite podcast apps, or you can follow us on the Sherpalution YouTube page. We're there. We're here for you every week. Every Saturday, we're doing the Sherpa Selects, which are the classic episodes that I really like from the first 6 seasons that we still have to add to our YouTube channel. So that's what I'm doing. And you guys get to hear all the fun stuff. So until then, Rebels, I say to you, Viva la Sherpalution. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. The podcast is now over. Please disperse and tell everyone about us. As long as they don't put us back in jail. Viva la Sherpalution!